following takes place between 9 a.m. and 10 a.m. Events occur in real time.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to FPC Radio Live. It's Wednesday, March the 8th, and March the 9th. I've been so just turned upside down based on what we saw yesterday, all the news that came out of the NFL. I don't know what day it is. I don't know what time it is. I just sort of hopped in my seat and instinctually started to go live, and unfortunately, John was here to join me. John, first off, who would have thought that Aaron Rodgers wouldn't be the lead story today on our show?
Yeah, he got upstaged, right? I mean, he's agreed to remain in Green Bay. The reports for 4 years, $200 million, $153 million guaranteed. And then an hour later, Russell Wilson gets traded from Seattle to Denver. And then 2 hours after that, Rodgers, who doesn't like to be upstaged, had a tweet out that, yes, he's coming back to Green Bay, but he hasn't signed a contract and the terms aren't accurate. So, of course, he has to have, the last thing to say during the day. But, yeah, monumental day for two quarterbacks, great quarterbacks, and maybe a little bit of balance of shift of power in the AFC when they add another quarterback in Russell Wilson. But, it was fascinating. And the season doesn't really the actual season doesn't start till next week, and we've already got some pretty good appetizers.
Yeah, and this is really kind of laying the groundwork for what should be a fairly interesting offseason. Now, when we saw, we both kind of we've been talking about Aaron Rodgers' future for a while, and I think we both kind of settled on him likely returning because we both agreed it was his best option from a, hopeful or success standpoint. Now, I don't know exactly what his contract situation is going to be, whether he's coming back. If he does sign an extension, I would imagine it would be a high dollar amount. I can't imagine it's going to be too far off of that 50 million. And look, good for him. That's his prerogative. But if it is anywhere close to that 4 years, first of all, I don't think. And here we are. We're starting with Aaron Rodgers. So apparently, the just the flow of everything just dictated how we were going to do everything. So, but I should have expected this. But anyways, if it is a 4-year contract, quote unquote, I don't think he comes anywhere close to playing those 4 years, first of all. And if it is, it's more, in my opinion, probably a cap manipulation, type of contract. And I'm not saying that in a bad way, because we've seen Brady and the Patriots do that. We saw it happen for him. And look, ultimately the team's going to have to pay for it, but they see it as probably worth it in their minds. And look, I think Aaron Rodgers played this to his advantage. He pushed the Packers into a corner where they didn't really have a choice because, he saw the panic in that franchise's eyes watching what they thought was a future franchise quarterback in Jordan Love. And, look, he's won back-to-back MVPs. Now, I don't necessarily agree with the second one, but the fact remains he is the reigning back-to-back MVP of this league. So, the Packers are looking at it and saying, hey, look, Tom Brady's gone. I mean, maybe they had an inkling about Russell Wilson leaving the NFC. This is as good of an opportunity as they're going to have Super Bowl, and you're not going to do that with Jordan Love. So they had to bring Aaron Rodgers back.
Absolutely. And if you're going to power rank the quarterbacks in the NFC, it starts with Aaron Rodgers, and then it goes to who? Matt Stafford, Dak Prescott, Kyla Murray, and that's about it. Where now you have Mahomes and Josh Allen and Joe Burrow, Russell Wilson, Justin Herbert, Lamar Jackson. You've got 6 franchise caliber. To mention a bunch of young guys in Mac Jones, Trevor Lawrence, and Zach Wilson, who are going to be entering their second year and should be better than they were as rookies. So that conference is loaded with quarterbacks. The NFC, not so much. It's a good opportunity. Green Bay, when I look at this, depending on what San Francisco does at quarterback, I would think the 3 leading contenders in the NFC will be Green Bay, the Rams, and San Francisco if they straighten out the quarterback situation, and maybe Dallas. And actually, those were the 4 top teams last year in the NFC. So nothing much will change there. But again, this is all going to come down to what he does in the playoffs. We know he's a great regular season quarterback. He's played good at times in the postseason. It's not like he's awful, but he's just not good enough and doesn't step up the way a player of that caliber should step up. But this is what it comes to. And it's a unique situation there, Ian, because they don't have an owner. And they just sold these phony stocks for about $90 million last year. they've got plenty of cash. They're flush in cash. I mean, Titletown is an incredible attraction. I mean, people actually go there in the summer on vacation to spend a couple of days to bring it all in. It's kind of like Fenway Park. You know, a lot of people come to Boston to see Fenway Park. Well, a lot of people go to Green Bay to see Titletown, and all the surroundings there as well. So they've got plenty of money. So that part of it isn't a concern. But again, you maneuver the cap, you franchise tag Devontae Adams, so you go at it for one more year. Now you see what you're going to have to do with the rest of that roster. But the roster should be good enough to get back to and win a Super Bowl. You can't tell me that, that it's not good enough. I mean, I know everybody's going to make up some sort of excuse. And look, he's my favorite player, but I'm going to criticize him. If he puts up 10 points on the board in next year's NFC Championship game, whose fault is that?
Well, I'll say this. I mean, they're good enough to get to the playoffs. I don't know if they're good enough to get back to the Super Bowl. And that's just based on the fact that they haven't been able to do that. And
right.
The competition in the NFC is worse this year, but I think this Packers team is going to be worse than they were the last 2 years. I thought the last 2 years, this was like talent and ability Packers team you're going to get. Because look, the reality of it is, if he does sign a contract, if he does come back, Devontae Adams is you're committing a significant amount of cap space to just a couple players. And I know people out there say, "Oh, who cares about the cap?" And look, you're going to be able to keep Devontae Adams. You're going to be able to keep Aaron Rodgers and some of these other names, but where you're going to sacrifice is 30 through 53. And this team already has some issues when it's like, you need one special teams play to be made. You need one play to be made in this situation. And they're sometimes getting it, but more often than not, they're not. And I don't think depleting that area of the roster is going to help. So, you might see some more, points to the camera and like little hand signals and cool, suave, Aaron Rodgers throughout the regular season. But I hate to say it. I mean, I think you're going to end up getting the same old result at the end of the day, and it's going to be maybe a first round exit, maybe an exit in the conference championship, because ultimately the NFC competition is weaker. But I also think the Packers are ultimately going to be weaker because we've already seen it, John. They're going to end up losing some defensive players, and the defense was a pretty solid unit for them last year.
It was. It was a good unit. I mean, it played great in the playoff game against San Francisco. Held them to 2 field goals and still weren't able to win. That's on the offense's shoulders, and it's also on the special teams, and they've had those issues, and I think they kind of addressed that in the offseason, bringing in Rich Bisaccia, who's one of the best special teams coaches in the NFL. So they should be better there. But the problem with Green Bay is when you commit so much money to so many of the top-tier players, that back end of your roster may be a little bit weak, and if those guys are playing special teams, like you said, Ian, all it takes is one slip-up, a blocked punt here, a muffed onside kick, 7 years ago in the NFC Championship game, and instead of going to the Super Bowl twice, you go home as a loser. It's going to be fascinating to see what happens here. I mean, if you're paying Rodgers $50 million and Devontae in the low 20s, it feels like an NBA team, right? Where two guys are taking up most of your salaries, and now you surround them with other players. Well, you can kind of do that in the NBA, right? You can have Durant, Kyrie, Ben Simmons, and smaller rosters, and you can always find some 3-and-D guys. Look at Philadelphia; you got Embiid and James Harden, and then they're surrounded by a lot of role players. Although Tyrese Maxey's a little more than a role player, but you get my point. So you can do that in the NBA. In football, you still have to have a pretty deep roster because, look, we'll go back to the NFC Championship game 2 years ago. Tom Brady looked across the line of scrimmage and saw Kenny King out there and just feasted on him, right? So now your second quarter is not all that good.
Catch a touchdown until like the end of this season. After that,
right.
That was his last touchdown catch for like 10 months. It's Scotty Miller. He just became non-existent for much of 2021. So
he was like David Tyree, who never caught another pass after that Super Bowl, right? So I know I didn't mean to bring it up, but sometimes you throw shots at me.
Hey, whatever.
I'm gonna be on the offensive sometimes. I was rooting for the Patriots in that Super Bowl, by the way.
Yeah, well, I was too, John. I was too, and that's why it hurts. That's why it hurts.
And I know Giants fans, and they would continually remind me, especially the second one too. But yeah, we'll get off that subject. It's too depressing.
No, and look, I mean, if you're a Packers fan, good for you. I mean, you should be happy. You should be excited that he's back, and this all but guarantees he's going to finish his career in Green Bay. I never saw him as a guy who would play deep into his 40s, let alone 240. Like I think maybe he plays 2 more years. If that, you know what I mean? Like that's what I'm saying.
Uh-huh.
If there was a contract extension of 4 years, then I don't believe it was for a full year, 4 years. I think there's likely going to be some outs there, and certainly some dead cap money there at the end. But I see him as a guy who might play a season or two. Maybe he rides it out one more year. Maybe this is truly the last dance. He rides it out with Devontae Adams because again, we don't know if there is a contract signing, and if there isn't, then maybe he's just returning. Maybe he gets a boost in pay. Maybe we get one of those Tom Brady 2019 contracts where it's okay, it's a 2 year contract, but the reality of it is it's 1 year. That second year is where the Packers are going to pay for it. And you know how we're going to get maybe a good indication of that is what they do with Jordan Love. Because if they
Mhm.
trade Jordan Love, then you figure okay, there's a good chance that okay Rodgers is going to be sticking around for at least 2 seasons, right? Um,
Right.
if you don't, then that kind of adds credibility to okay, maybe he is just playing one more year. You franchise tag Devontae Adams. You keep this team together as much as you can. You try to take advantage of this transition in the NFC, and most notably, John, and you'll as a Rodgers fan, the absence of Tom Brady. Like
Sure.
like I know it sounds
For
crazy.
now.
Yeah,
For
yeah.
now.
Well, for now, like they can set everything up perfectly, and Tom is like, you know what, I'm coming back, and there you go. That goes out the window, and all of a sudden, Aaron Rodgers is no matter what they do, you still have to get over that hump, and I just don't know if they would. All of a sudden, you're looking at this situation this season, and like you said, you laid it out. I mean, who are the NFC quarterbacks? Like you said, Matt Stafford, and I'm like, there's in my opinion, a pretty significant gap between the two quarterbacks. Even though I
Yeah.
know Matt Stafford just came off winning a Super Bowl, let's not let that jade like. There's a huge gap between Aaron Rodgers and Matt Stafford. I mean, I
Sure.
don't care what you're gonna tell me. Um, and Matt Stafford's number two. You know, like
Mhm.
I'm. Let's say this. I'm kind of like Jerry. I'm souring a little bit on Dak Prescott.
Me too.
And we talked about this a little bit towards the end of last season. Like, we I think we both kind of again came into this year with a lot of high regard for Dak Prescott, and I still think he's a really good quarterback. But the more I see, the more it goes on. I feel like there's something missing, and I can't
Mhm.
pinpoint it, but there's something missing. So those are the top three quarterbacks in the NFC.
Yeah, and then you look at Kyler Murray is probably
I,
fourth, right? And
he
he seems to be having issues in Arizona.
Yeah, I'm not even until he figures that out and the team figures it out. I'm not even going to talk about Kyler Murray right now because again, I saw him for yet another season just completely nosedive in the second half, and the way he's kind of I don't know, the whole off season has kind of turned me off to him quite a bit. I'm just at this point now he's getting to the point where kind of like I'm with the Texans, you got to do it. I don't care. Like, I don't care if you have a nice stretch for 3 or 4 weeks. I don't. I need to see it for the entire season. I need to see success before I start believing in him again. There's no more
Right.
potential for me. I need to see it. So to me, I'm looking at the NFC, and you're like Aaron Rodgers. You're like, why the hell would I ever go to the AFC? Why would I ever go to
Right.
the Broncos? Why would I ever go to any other team that's going to present a tougher I mean, he gets to play in a division where the toughest competition is the Vikings. And look, they're a pretty good team, but you have the Lions and you have the Bears as well, and it's like great, like that's awesome
Mhm.
for Aaron Rodgers. That's great because again, I would at this point say, and this will be my kind of backhanded compliment a little bit. By default, he is currently the best quarterback in the league, but very
Sure.
clearly he is the best quarterback in the NFC right now. And I think if you're thinking about any sort of opportunity to be successful, that's it right there. I mean, it's like well, why leave?
Yeah, and there's a great chance that you end up 13-4 again and are the one seed because the Rams, as good as they are as the defending champs, are going to have to play San Francisco twice and Arizona twice, and we'll see what happens with Seattle with all these draft picks. I mean, that's going to take a couple of years to figure out how they hit or miss on those. But yeah, I mean, the NFC is there for them. It was there for them last year. It was there for them the year before. I mean, they've
exactly.
had
So,
home field
yeah.
advantage, 2 straight years, which is what he wanted. And by the way, now, Lambeau Field, which used to be a great home field advantage, and I think it is in the regular season because he plays so well. But then when you get to the postseason, not so much. He doesn't play as well. He's 5-4 at Lambeau Field in the postseason. Tom Brady has 4 career home losses, but he also has 22 wins. So, he hasn't stepped up. I mean, it's that simple. Can he start doing it now? I mean, he's still got the talent. I'm not worried about that. It's just, can he finish the job?
I mentioned this before, and I went into it a little bit yesterday. We did a FPC NFL Sunday reaction, and I said this is the hype. If there was a calendar, an Aaron Rodgers year calendar, this is the
Mhm.
absolute peak of the Aaron Rodgers cycle.
Yeah.
The stink of a playoff disappointment has worn off, and in this
Right.
case, you get that MVP award, significantly after the fact. So by the time he gets that award, it's already kind of softened, and now we're getting into the off season where it's more about his future and less about his past and the potential. This is a time of the year, John, where the Packers have the best running backs in the league. They have the best receivers. They have the best offensive line. Like, how can you beat this defense? I mean, there's no team better than the Packers right now. And we see this grow throughout the season. We get into, like I said, there's going to be more, thumb and pinky waving, to the camera, winking, smirking, and all that stuff throughout the season. Packers fans are going to go crazy, and then you start creeping towards December, and then there's
Mhm.
that uneasy feeling that, okay, this is great. He may be on his way to yet another MVP, and that, who knows? I mean, that could be the case, very well be. But in the back of your mind, you're like, "But that's when the first but starts to trickle in around
Right.
Thanksgiving into December. But what about the playoffs? Okay, well
Mhm.
now we're getting to the bottom of that cycle where it's like, right now we're at the peak where everyone loves Aaron Rodgers. He can do no wrong. He is the greatest, the coolest, the most. He's like Tony, like I said from Seinfeld. Hey Tony. Um,
Yep.
but you get to December and into the playoffs, that's when you get to the bottom. That's when it bottoms out. And every single year we go through the whole same thing. Where at that point now, John, now the Packers aren't that good around them. Now the offensive line isn't that good. Now it's, excuse after excuse after excuse. And it's the same cycle over and over and over again. And we've seen it for the last handful of years. So the biggest question, John, is can they break that cycle? And again, I don't know. I mean, this is all well and good. This was the right decision for, I think, them, the Packers, because I haven't seen anything from Jordan Love to convince myself that he's a guy. But they didn't really have a choice if they wanted to compete, and it was the right
Mhm.
decision for Aaron Rodgers. But at that point, that's great. Now we have to face reality, and the situations have been better for them the last couple years, and they failed to accomplish what they're looking for. So
Yeah.
everything's
No,
great.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Last year was set up for them. I mean, they're playing San Francisco on a freezing cold Saturday night, and their offense shut down, and they weren't able to win that game. And I think if they'd won that game, they probably, well, maybe they would have won the Super Bowl. They would have had an opportunity because I think they could beat the Rams in Cincinnati. But who the hell knows? Um, yeah, I mean, it almost has a little feel like the Tampa Bay Rays or the Oakland A's under Billy Beane, where great regular seasons, you get to the postseason and not so much. Or remember the Atlanta Braves for
Yeah.
about 12 to
Yeah.
15 years, every year we're in the postseason, and for all that, they won one World Series. But I'll give them a little credit. They at least went to multiple World Series. It's not like they didn't show up again. Green Bay under Rodgers hasn't been back to the freaking Super Bowl since 2011. I mean, we're coming up on 11 years. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a long gap for a quarterback of that caliber. And you can even say the guy who got traded yesterday, Russell Wilson, after back-to-back Super Bowl appearances, hasn't been even close to going back to the Super Bowl because Seattle, after 2014, hasn't even played in the NFC Championship game. So both of these guys who were in high demand, that whether it be for a contract extension or a trade, at some point, they've got to get over the hump,
Mhm.
and bring their teams a little bit farther and not have the same excuse of, well, my defense isn't as good and I don't have the offensive line and blah blah blah. At some point, the quarterback doesn't have to kind of carry a team in certain situations.
Yeah, and that's kind of and we're gonna talk here about Russell Wilson before we have to head out of here today. But that's kind of the thing. It's like everyone's oh well, Aaron Rodgers played with the backup offensive line. Look, Bakhtiari was out for the entire season. That was not a backup
Right.
offensive line anymore. That
No.
that was a starting offensive line, and it was a great offensive line and graded out at any metric that you looked at, whether you believe in it or not. They graded well.
Mhm.
Objectively, subjectively, it doesn't matter. They graded out fairly well. So, and kind of to the roster turnover point, what's going to happen now is, well, what if Bakhtiari does get injured again? And now you're, instead of going to a solid depth at offensive line, you're going to a little bit of shaky depth. And all of a sudden things
Mhm.
start to change for a guy who, even with a great offensive line, gets sacked at a high percentage, relatively high percentage. Let's put it that way, based on, like, and we often compared him and Tom Brady, and that was one of the huge differences between the two. Brady could be pressured at a much higher rate, but his
Mhm.
sack percentage was one of the lowest in the league, in league history, for a guy who's immobile. Whereas Aaron Rodgers tends to take a high number of sacks, and that kind of goes into his play style. But before we run out of time, though, I do want to shift over to Russell Wilson, because you kind of made a good point, and brought up a good point about just the pressure that's also on him. Because look, Denver, this is a team that we've talked about for a while. This is a team that was, or felt like it was, just a quarterback away. Just a
Mhm.
quarterback away. They had a good young defense. They have really good young skill players. And you have guys like Brock Osweiler and Drew Lock and so on and so forth coming through. I mean, they had Teddy Bridgewater for a little bit, but I mean, the reality of it is, this has been a barren wasteland of quarterbacks since Peyton Manning retired. And even in Peyton Manning's last season, it was a barren wasteland of quarterbacks. They just happened to have a historically great defense that made up for it. Um,
Mhm.
Russell Wilson's got a lot to prove. I mean, you and I have talked about it. I'm not as gaga over Russell Wilson as a lot of people are. Like, I saw someone
Mhm.
tweet, like, something about how the Broncos just don't care about drafting quarterbacks. They just go out and get future Hall of Famers. And I'm like, well, what future Hall of Famer outside of Peyton Manning have they got? This was after the Russell Wilson trade. So to me, I'm not as high on him. I think he's a pretty good quarterback. I think he obviously makes this Broncos team better, no doubt. But I mean, you went from having the fourth best quarterback in the division to the third, right?
That could be accurate, yeah, because I mean, I think that Justin Herbert will only get better in his third year, and
Mhm.
Wilson is a durable guy. I know he got hurt last year, and that was a finger injury, which that's not lack of conditioning. That's just
No,
he
I mean,
threw a
that
pass.
was the first time he missed games. All I'm not.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
he's a tough
I never.
guy. He's out
Yeah,
there. I just, you know,
yeah. I mean, I would take right now for the next 5 years. I would take Justin Herbert over Russell Wilson. One
well,
guy's
no,
33.
forget about 5 years. Just let's think of
Even
it
this
in a
year,
vacuum. Yeah,
yeah,
just going into
yeah. I
2022.
I could go there only because I think he's only going to get better, right? So, yeah, I would take obviously Mahomes, Herbert. Uh, Derek Carr now becomes the worst quarterback in the division. He's pretty good. I
Yeah,
mean, he's I don't
yeah.
think a great quarterback, but he's pretty good. I mean, I don't know if I can ever remember a division that loaded at quarterback, right? Let alone the conference when you throw in Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, and Lamar Jackson if he's healthy. That's going to be a lot of fun to watch and very interesting to see. But yeah, we'll see with Denver. I think people are thinking that Brady went to Tampa, won a Super Bowl, that Stafford went to the Rams, won a Super Bowl, and now Wilson's going to go to Denver and win a Super Bowl. It's not that easy. I mean, Brady made it look that way because he's Brady, and Stafford did a great job with the Rams, but the Rams were already a playoff
Well,
team
and,
when he
and
went there.
that's the big difference, because, like, I kind of brought this up yesterday too, where it's like, the reality of it is, it's hard to go to a new team and win successfully, and you're just going to have to ignore the fact that it's happened in back-to-back years. It's kind of like,
Right.
home teams of hosting a Super Bowl. Like, if you were to tell someone that just started watching 2 years ago that it's very rare, they feel like, get out of here. But the reality of it is, even if it has happened the last 2 years, it's still extremely rare. Same thing with this. Like, just because it's happened the last 2 years, and to your point, there's a huge difference between the two teams. The
Right.
Rams, for the most, that entire team was essentially in the Super Bowl just a few years ago. Not
Mm-hmm.
the bulk, the main guys, the Aaron Donalds, the Jalen Ramsey, so on
Mm-hmm.
and so forth. The Bucks obviously had not won a playoff game in almost 2 decades. Uh, in this case, Denver, yes, they have somewhat recently gone to the Super Bowl, but it's a completely different team. Well, maybe Von Miller does come back. Who knows? But this is I don't know if Russell Wilson is a guy to elevate a team to championship levels. And that there's a difference in my mind to great players elevate their teams no matter what. Russell Wilson's going to make that team better. I'm not saying that he's not. I just don't
Mhm.
know if I believe if he's the guy to do that, to elevate that team. Because to your point, Seahawks haven't been back to the NFC Championship game since 2014.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's a lower level than, say, obviously Brady and Rodgers. And, I think Mahomes is still a better quarterback. And I think Josh Allen will be better this year and Justin Herbert. So we've just named 5 guys who I would take over Russell Wilson right now. He'd be rejuvenated going to a new team. He has an offensive minded head coach now and Nathaniel Hackett, who, of course, was Green Bay's offensive coordinator the last 3 years. So I think they'll obviously be in play more than they were last year. I mean, they've generally been a 7-10, 7-9 type team where from time to time they'll pull off an upset. I mean, they went to Dallas and beat the tar out of the Cowboys, but then they'll have some sort of crazy loss where you go, what's wrong with this team? So maybe he can stabilize things on that end, and maybe they're a 10-7 team, make the playoffs as a wild card, and see where they go. But certainly a week before the official season starts, this is quite a day to see 2 quarterbacks, put their imprint in and know that they're going to be playing next year, one in a different location.
And look, I mean, this could ultimately, if you're the Buffalo Bills, you're probably sitting there thinking like this is great because maybe Denver doesn't go and win the division, but
Right.
it's going to be infinitely more harder for a Kansas City team. Yeah, I mean, Patrick Mahomes is great and all, but again, that's a team that I don't think is necessarily getting better next year.
Uh-huh.
So it's going to be tougher for them. You have a Chargers team who I agree with you. I think Justin Herbert's going to be better this year. Whether the team is better, I don't know. They just gave Mike Williams a nice extension, so he's going to be around. They have guys like Austin Eckler, so they have talent on this team. I think they're going to be tough. This is going to be a very, Russell Wilson's not, new to this. I mean, the NFC West was a gauntlet, whether they were all 7-9 or all 10 to 13 win teams. It didn't matter.
Right.
So this is going to be a lot of the same. So I do think that this is going to be a big factor, not only in the division, but in the AFC hierarchy, because this could give Buffalo a bit of an advantage because Kansas City and them, they're probably going to be fighting for that number 1 seed. The Ravens, again, if Lamar Jackson's healthy, he kind of returns a little bit to what he was. I have some doubts about that, so I'm kind of on the fence about Lamar Jackson and the Ravens, but the potential is certainly there. So, yeah, it's going to be a fun division to watch. I'll tell you that much. There should be some pretty exciting games among those 3 teams. I mean, there already are. Like Denver almost beat Kansas City without Russell Wilson. It's just
Right,
how that
yeah.
division is. It's again very much like the NFC West, where it's like it didn't really matter where these teams were. When they play a divisional rival, it's just they throw everything about these 2 teams out the window and just watch them play because you're just going to see something.
Yeah, and we obviously talked endlessly about the Chargers-Chiefs matchups last year, which were riveting television. And the Raiders made the playoffs last year. People do seem to forget about that, but they would probably be put at number 4 right now in that division. And that's the team that made the playoffs a year ago. So
And I
that
I
division's
think
going to be
they're
interesting.
I think they're going to be better. I honestly, based on just listening to Josh McDaniels and kind of seeing where I think he's grown a lot
Mhm.
since obviously Indianapolis and certainly since Denver. Um, I think he's going to make this team better. And let's not forget the absolute drama that just circulated this team from start to finish, and they still, to your point, were able to sneak into the playoffs. So I think that it can go either one way or the other for them. They could take that and grow and use that as a catalyst to be a successful run for this team, or they could just plummet to the depths of the conference and be the Raiders that we know and love for the last 20 years.
Right.
Either or.
Yeah.
I happen to think that they're going to be closer to being a playoff contender than a basement dweller. But again, it's a tough division. Who knows? That might really hurt them in the long run. So, all right, free agency is about what is today? The 8th. So 8 days away. 16th.
Mhm.
So we got plenty of stuff coming up. This was a great show because it was easy stuff to talk about. We didn't even have to prep anything. It was just all there for us, all that news. And there's still news coming out. There's still information coming out about different cuts. Franchise tags obviously are all set, but we're going to see some more veterans like Bobby Wagner get cut in the coming days and add to that free agency pool. So until then, we're going to say goodbye for today. We will be back Friday to maybe wrap up yet some more quarterback trades. Maybe John Watson gets traded. Actually, I believe he finds out Friday whether or not he will get charged in any of his cases. So we will wait and see what happens with that. But we will talk to you then, and it should be a good time. So everyone, have a great Wednesday, have a great Thursday, and we'll see you on